Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here. It's my honor to be the last speaker this afternoon. It's my opportunity to talk to you about an issue that I think matters to every one of us and to the future, and to technology. It's really a cause of our time. It is digital peace. And this is an important time for lots of reasons that I know we all appreciate, but I think there's some additional reasons that I want to share with you. I think we all appreciate what an exciting era of technology we're living in today. Technology is advancing, it's changing around the world. I think one of the things that's so exciting is that unlike a decade ago, this change isn't confined to Silicon Valley or the West Coast of the United States. We're seeing it here in Lisbon. We're seeing it in cities and capitals across Europe. And the benefits that technology is creating are sometimes even awe-inspiring. It's enabling people to do new things, like these architects using a Microsoft HoloLens to design a building in 3D. But that's just the beginning. I genuinely believe that over the next decade, artificial intelligence may help the world cure cancer. It's an exciting time to be at a place like this. But that's not the only thing that's happening. We're also living in a time when new threats are emerging, new threats that involve technology itself. Whether it's the news stories that we read about attacks on the electrical grid or attacks on elections, this too has become an issue for our community. Certainly at Microsoft, we see this. We see this every day because every single day there are 6.5 trillion signals, points of data that come into our cloud, our data centers, from the 2 billion customers who use our 200 services, who have 1.5 billion devices running Windows every day. And unfortunately, one of the things that we see is that the tools that we've created, the tools oftentimes that you've created, have been turned by others into weapons. Last year, 2017, was a wake-up call. It was a wake-up call about the way people, unfortunately, in some nation states, in some governments, are using our tools as weapons. And there were 2 days that woke up the world like no other set of days during the course of the year. The first was the 12th of May, when the WannaCry attack swept first across Western Europe and then followed the sun west, ultimately impacting over 150 countries. And the second was just a month later, the 26th of June, when the NotPetya attack started in Ukraine, and then it impacted companies and businesses and customers around the world. I've often found that when I've talked to people in government about these attacks, they sometimes say, we don't really need to worry. These are not attacks on people, they say. These are just attacks of machines on machines. That is a problem, because people are being victimized by these attacks. And yet what we've concluded is we can't expect the world to open its eyes to the real impact of these problems if the world can't see with its own eyes the people, the human beings, the individuals who are suffering as a result. Once we recognized that challenge, we realized we needed to go meet some of these individuals ourselves. We needed to go capture their stories so we could start to share them around the world. That's why I want to take a few minutes so you can see and hear for yourself, not my story, but their story.
Я думаю, что наша страна находится в стадии войны, поэтому мы можем много что рассказать общественности, мировой общественности и показать все-таки лицо кибервойны.
A global cyber attack.
We've never seen anything on this scale.
It can travel from computer to computer. Hospitals paralyzed, computers had shut down.
WannaCry is different.
Tell us a little bit about WannaCry. What happened here in the United Kingdom?
I think WannaCry is a great example of how nation states are impacting businesses and ultimately individuals as well.
The WannaCry attack impacted 150 countries. Can you tell us what your experience was at the NHS?
We had over 19,000 appointments cancelled, and those are people who are worried about their cancer appointment or their appointment for an operation.
I was diagnosed with a heart murmur, which was the start of the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's a very serious surgery. I wanted my life back. After I'd had my chest shaved at 6 o'clock in the morning, the doctor looked very, not upset, but concerned, shall we say, and he said, "We've been hacked. All our systems are down across the whole hospital."
He said, "It's not going to happen," and he was in shock.
Suddenly we've discovered that a bit of our society, a bit of our social infrastructure could be switched off. WannaCry, it was a kind of a warning shot.
The malware crippled computers across Ukraine.
Perhaps the most sophisticated in a series of attacks, taking control of computers and demanding digital ransom. The list of companies impacted around the world is growing.
What's at stake? What could happen?
I think what NotPetya represents is not just the evolution of the attack in terms of the methodologies involved, but also the evolution of intent.
Ну, чтобы понимать, что за 2,5 часа, 10 часов утра, пол Украины уже было поражено.
We have TV stations who've been on the air when their computers just died.
You cannot receive cash in ATM machine because ATMs also doesn't work. It was real shock for Kyiv citizens.
75% of my clients were affected by petition. Some companies were destroyed totally. They didn't understand why they're losing their job. Everybody is just thinking, we hope this will never happen again, but I'm afraid this will happen again.
One of the objectives in the cyber attacks we face is disruption. To stop operating, to create significant burden to the life of the citizens, governments, businesses, where the cost of doing business or recovering is extremely high.
In 2017, a lot was the same. Cyber attacks were happening, they were affecting organizations. What changed was the impact on our lives.
It was the most awful time because I didn't know what was going to happen now.
Stop and think about what it means in real terms to real people. It isn't a machine you're affecting, and if it is, maybe that machine's keeping somebody alive.
Who needs to know what? What do you think the broad public needs to understand about these issues?
Ultimately, all of us pay the price when it comes to nations in particular who are attacking each other by using us as the means. What are we doing to come together? If we don't have this conversation now, when it happens and we all retreat behind walls, that is when this becomes a catastrophic event globally. And we need to do everything we can to at least talk about these issues before it happens.
Last year, almost 1 billion people on the planet were victims of a cyber attack. And this is the time for us to have this conversation, in part because these issues and these threats are going to continue to grow. They're going to continue to grow because everything is being connected. Every thermostat, every electrical heater, every power plant, every medical device, every hospital, every automobile, every railway car, every airplane is becoming connected to the internet. And in a world where everything is being connected, the truth is anything can be disrupted. And this is no longer just a question of someone's inconvenience because their computer stops working. If a hospital loses access to its computers, if a hospital loses access to electricity, if people in the winter lose access to their electrical heating, people's lives will be at risk. But it's a time to talk about this not just because of these broad trends and long-term concerns. It's a time to talk about this because this is an important week. It's a week with each passing day, more and more people are going to focus on what will happen this weekend in Paris. When leaders from across Europe and even around the world come together for the Paris Peace Forum. It's not just an important week. It's the kind of week that can open people's eyes because it is also a historic week. This Sunday will mark an important day. It doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter where you live. It's actually important in a way that perhaps we haven't yet thought enough about. Because at 11 o'clock in the morning, the world will mark the centennial, the 100-year point since the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of the armistice that ended the First World War. The war that was supposed to end all wars. And I think for many people, you might say, yes, I know that. But you might also ask, what does that have to do with me? What does that have to do with technology? What does it have to do with us? And what I would say is that the lessons of the 20th century and what it involved in terms of technology in the world, in fact, speak to many of the challenges that we need to address in our own time. But it's hard to see that unless you go to the places where people experience that. The battlefields in Belgium and France. Battlefields that we had the opportunity to see for ourselves and that I want to share with you.
Alors, nous sommes ici dans le grand cimetière de Daumont, qui est le cimetière de regroupement des tombes des combattants français. Ce qui est vraiment le grand cimetière mémoriel de la France pour la bataille de Verdun. La bataille de Verdun, c'est un souvenir énorme, un traumatisme énorme. Et pour la France, c'est véritablement la mère des batailles. 300 000 morts, c'est-à-dire 160 000 morts français et 140 000 morts allemands, dont une partie importante sont encore sur le champ de bataille parce qu'ils ont disparu dans la terre quelque part. Et Verdun ensuite va s'imposer comme une référence dans l'histoire universelle. Très souvent, quand on parle d'une autre bataille, on dit « c'est un Verdun ».
When the battle began, it was a battle between men, but it was also a battle where artillery played an important role. It became a battle between men and machines.
Si la Première Guerre mondiale est au début une guerre d'infanterie, c'est-à-dire les hommes se battent, ou de cavalerie, très vite, ça devient une guerre mécanique, ça devient une guerre industrielle. Et l'enjeu de la guerre de 14-18, c'est l'industrie qui va être derrière, c'est-à-dire tous les progrès industriels, peut-on dire l'artillerie, les gaz, l'armée aérienne, les mitrailleuses qui vont fortement progresser. Et la majorité des morts de Verdun ne sont pas morts au combat main à la main, ils sont morts tués par l'artillerie.
So this industrial war, what was the impact on civilians who lived in the area?
À Paris, il y a eu beaucoup de bombardements qui ont tué énormément de civils. En Roumanie, les civils, il y a 3/4 de civils par rapport à 1/4 de militaires qui sont tués. En Serbie, ce sont les civils qui vont mourir en masse. La Première Guerre mondiale est véritablement une rupture à la fois démographique pour les habitants, mais encore plus une rupture dans la tête des gens.
With the vantage point of history, what were the causes of World War I?
Premièrement, personne n'imaginait que la guerre allait commencer. Bien qu'on voit aujourd'hui, quand on étudie, que tout était prêt pour cette guerre. On voit par exemple qu'en Europe, l'armement avait monté de façon colossale.
Do you see any similarities between 1914 and today?
Il y a la même inquiétude qu'on peut avoir quand on voit la progression foudroyante des armements dans le monde. On est exactement dans la même situation des progressions d'armement entre 1910 et 1913.
I'm not here to say that the next World War is imminent, but I am here to say that there are lessons from a century ago that we can learn and apply, that we need to apply to our own future. And perhaps two above all jump out. The first is that in the first decade and a half of the 20th century, technology advanced at an enormous pace, but humanity, human institutions, failed to keep up. And when the threats finally became clear to everyone involved, the governments of the world sent their troops to the battlefield rather than to their diplomats to the negotiating table. These were fundamental lessons, and 4 years and 16 million deaths later, the governments of Europe and North America thought that they had learned these lessons, but they failed to remember them in the decade and a half that followed. In the 21 years after this armistice, the reality is that democracy weakened. Multilateralism withered. The League of Nations died. And throughout it all, technology kept marching forward. What had been a biplane became a bomber. What had been an experiment in a tank became, an experiment in a trench became a tank. And then in 1939, a new and even worse war ensued, and by the time that war had ended, humanity had invented the ability to destroy itself. It took 6 decades after the dropping of that atomic bomb for an American president to travel to Japan, to the site where it had fallen. But in 2016, Barack Obama went to Japan. And when he laid a wreath at the site where so many civilians had died, he had a message not just for the past, but for our future as well. Because as he said, technological progress without an equivalent progress in human institutions can doom us. And in effect, the scientific revolution, the technology revolution, all of this requires a moral revolution as well. That is the challenge for our time. In short, if we want this century to be better, we need to do better. And so we need to think about what that means. This century, we need governments to do better. We need governments to work across borders and not just by themselves. And the good news is we're starting to see some important steps, like last December, when 6 countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Japan, and New Zealand together stepped up with a public attribution of the WannaCry attack. But we need more than that. We need governments to stand up for clear principles. Principles that they will have the opportunity to endorse and push forward in Paris next week. Principles that call for the protection of innocent civilians and our civilian infrastructure. Principles that call for the protection of elections and our electoral processes. Principles that call for the protection of the availability and indeed the internet itself. And we need governments not only to stand up for principles like these, we need governments to move these principles forward so that ultimately we have strong rules and laws that will govern what governments do. Efforts that build on the 4th Geneva Convention of the last century, a convention that called for governments to pledge, as they did, that they would protect civilians even in times of war, that will call on governments to now protect civilians in what is supposed to be a time of peace. We need to build on work in the United Nations. We need governments to do what is needed, and that is over the next decade, to fill in the gaps in the rules and ensure that we not only have a Geneva Convention that protects people in the physical world, but a digital Geneva Convention that protects people when they're using the devices on which their lives so often rely. But we can't look to or expect governments to solve all of this by themselves. Others need to act as well. Last century, when the clouds of oppression loomed over Germany and started to spread across Western Europe, the voices of businesses went unheard. The voices of businesses went unheard because the voices of businesses went unused. Businesses, large companies, small companies, they remained silent. We cannot remain silent in this century. Businesses need to do better as well. And there is no part of the business community across Europe or in the United States or around the world that has a higher responsibility than one part of the business community, and that's the tech sector. We have a higher responsibility for a clear reason. Unlike conflicts on land or sea or in the air, when we're talking about cyberspace, fundamentally, we're talking about space that is private property. We're talking about data centers and undersea cables and laptops and phones and devices and services that fundamentally we create. Like it or not, and I don't think we should like it, the reality is nonetheless inescapable. We have become the battlefield. And because we become the battlefield, we by necessity have also become the first responders in keeping people safe, in helping people when there are cyber attacks. And that's why it's so important that we too stand up for clear principles. Now, the good news is since the Web Summit last year, there has been some real progress. And our industry is finally stepping forward. We're doing what needs to be done. One important date this year was the 17th of April. It was a date when 34 companies came together in San Francisco and unveiled and launched a new tech accord, a cybersecurity tech sector accord. And together we pledged to protect everyone everywhere, to oppose cyber attacks against innocent civilians anywhere, and to make these principles real by taking strong steps together. And the even better news is the group has continued to grow. By last month, it had reached 60, and today it has reached 69 companies from across Europe, from the United States, from Canada, from Japan. It will continue to grow and grow. And it's not just that effort. Here in Europe, Siemens led a similar effort, an important effort to launch what it called the Charter of Trust. It brought together important companies like Airbus and Deutsche Telekom and Daimler, companies that are focused on the protection of the Internet of Things, companies that are focused on protecting the supply chain. That's why we at Microsoft were proud to support Siemens in its effort as well. We'll need to continue to take strong steps, and we are. Whether it's disrupting cyber attacks in the form of botnets, or doing what we need to do against the even more serious threats from nation states. We have started over the past year to summon the political courage to work together to do what needs to be done, as we did on the 12th of December last year, when Microsoft and Facebook in a simultaneous operation disrupted the malware capability of the North Korean group responsible for the malware attack called called WannaCry. And we followed that with another step this August. It's when you first saw Microsoft, and then you saw Google, and you saw Facebook take action against Russian hacking aimed at election interference in the United States. These steps are not easy for companies to take, because let's face it, no one thought that you should design a company to defend against a foreign military or government. But the truth of the matter is, in the world today, if we're going to defend and protect our democratic societies, we need to take these new types of steps. That's why we at Microsoft launched in April a Defending Democracy program. It's why in August we announced that in the United States, with an eye towards the midterm elections, we would offer free of charge a new program called Account Guard. A program that would give to office holders and candidates and political parties the best threat intelligence assistance that we can provide. It's why we brought that to the United Kingdom last week. It's why we brought it to Ireland the day before yesterday. It's why we will bring it to countries across the European Union as they look to important elections next year. Because we need to keep taking these types of steps. What this really underscores is that we need everyone to come together. We need multi-stakeholder action. The kinds of action that I think we can look forward to seeing in Paris next week. The kinds of efforts that bring together not just governments, but also companies and NGOs and people from across the planet. We'll need to build new institutions, and we'll do that in the year ahead. But there is one other thing, one last thing that I want to touch upon as well. In some ways, it is the bedrock. It is the foundation. It is the most important thing on which everything else needs to rest. Because when one looks at the tragedies of a century ago, one other thing is clear. The voices of people were silent. They went unheard because people didn't speak out. This century, the voices of people need to be heard. And there is no voice that is more important in the world today for the protection of our online community than the voices of the generation that has grown up with digital technology, the digital natives of Europe and indeed the entire planet. People who grow up with something, people who are natives, recognize the precious assets that are in their home. And they're always the people you can count on, that you need to be able to count on to stand up and say, this matters, protect my home. For us, our home is many things. It's a flat, it's a house, it's a community, it's a city, it's a country, it's a continent, but as much as anything else, it's a community. It's an online community. That's why we've launched the Digital Peace Now campaign. We need a campaign where people can use their voices, where their voices can be heard. That's why we've created with others across civil society a digital peace pledge. A pledge that calls on people to say, this is our digital community, and we want governments to respect it rather than attack it. It's why we've created a pledge that is attracting signatures literally from around the world. It's why I hope that you'll consider adding your signature to this pledge. The truth of the matter is this. We're living in an unbelievable and exciting time. We're living with a new generation of technology. And fundamentally, the thing that has brought us together is not just this technology itself, but a new generation of opportunities. It is a great time to be connected to technology and the tech sector. But we will do the future an injustice if we don't also recognize that this new generation of technology has also created a new generation of challenges, a new generation of threats. You are the generation that more than any other generation will define the 21st century. Because you are the people that so often were born as the century was about to start, or as it began. You are the generation that will live your lives in the 21st century. You are the generation whose voices need to be heard. Your voice needs to be heard for the people who are here today, for people around the world, for the people for whom we have the opportunity to create a brighter future. I hope you'll use your voice. I hope we can work together, because if we do, we can do what we need to do we can make this century better than the last one. Thank you very much. Thank you.